James Tierney, TierneyEducation.com here, about to answer a question I got in the comments this morning from my video about calculating elasticity using the midpoint method. The question that I got was, what does it mean when we get a value equal to -3 when it comes to the price elasticity of demand? So let's go ahead and look at that number, the -3, or any other number that we would get when we calculate the price elasticity of demand. Let's start out by writing down that equation that we use to calculate the price elasticity of demand. The shorthand that I'm going to use is E sub D for the elasticity of demand. And the general equation that we're looking at is the elasticity of demand is the percentage change in the quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. The way I love to talk about this with my students is we look at the top. How does a change in the quantity demanded, ... How does the change in the quantity demanded respond, because we know elasticity is about responsiveness, respond to the change in price? So when you're looking at the elasticity of demand, if you can think of how does a change in the quantity demanded respond to a change in the price, you'll know A, what we mean by price elasticity of demand, and B, which one goes on the top, which one goes on the bottom, which one's the numerator, which one's the denominator. Now that we've seen the equation and we know how to take that equation into words and we have a bit of a foundation when it comes to the price elasticity of demand, let's look at what this number is going to be and then how we can interpret that number, that value. First off, what do we know? We know because of the law of demand, that when prices increase, the quantity demanded decreases. What that's telling me with this equation is therefore the price elasticity of demand is always going to be a negative number. In other words, elasticity of demand will be less than 0. With this information, we can look at 3 different situations. The first situation we can look at is if we see inelastic goods. We'll talk about what it means to be relatively inelastic in a second. We can look at unit elastic goods. And then we can look at what we call relatively elastic goods. So there's 3 different possibilities when you are looking at your numerical value for the price elasticity of demand. Let's start in the middle. The unit elastic is telling me that when the price changes, the quantity demanded is going to change in proportion with that. So it's going to be the same change. For example, if a price goes up by 25%, the quantity demanded is going to fall by 25%. What does that mean? Well, that means that the percentage change in the quantity demanded is acting the exact same way. It's responding in the same way as the percentage change in price. What does that tell me? Therefore, I know that my elasticity of demand is going to equal -1. It's going to equal -1. Some textbooks want you to take the absolute value of this, so I'm just going to write that down. For those of you who are using a textbook or have an instructor that cares more about the absolute value, that means the absolute value of the elasticity demand is just equal to 1. Let's go over to a relatively inelastic good. What does that mean? A relatively inelastic good tells me that the percentage change in the quantity demanded is less than the percentage change in the price. Think of a rubber band. An inelastic rubber band, you can't stretch. It does not respond much. The response is less than what we saw on the price change. Let's say the prices go up by 25%, but my quantity demanded only goes down by like 10%. What that tells me is that this good is relatively inelastic. It's inelastic. We know that I can raise the price, and the quantity demanded is not going to come down by much. So what does that mean? Well, that means the quantity demanded here is the numerator. So in words, you can think of this as the numerator is less than the denominator. What this means is with magnitude, that's going to be less than 1. How do we see something with the numerator less than the denominator? For example, maybe 3 over 4 or 2 over 7, right? So that tells us my value of the elasticity of demand is going to be between 0 and -1, because that's where we see those types of fractions. Right? Remember, these are negative if we're doing just the value. And if we are looking at the absolute value, then it's going to be between 0 and +1. Again, that depends on how your instructor and your textbook and your curriculum goes after and teaches the price elasticity of demand. What about a relatively elastic good? Elastic, like a rubber band, it stretches a lot. It's a bigger response to the change in price. So we'd say the percentage change in the quantity demanded ends up being greater than that percentage change in price. So if the price goes up by 25%, the quantity demanded goes down by 50% or 75%. It's a big response. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the numerator, in this case, numerator is greater than the denominator. So the numerator is greater than the denominator. So again, some examples of that, right? Some examples would be like 3 over 2, 4 over 1, anything like that, right? Negative signs if we're not doing the absolute value and the magnitude. So how do we see that? Well, it's going to be greater than 1 in magnitude. So in this case, we need the elasticity to be less than -1. Or if we're using the absolute value, it will be just greater than 1. A good way to learn about and study elasticity is to break it down like this. I'm going to erase this and then we're going to review it with a bit of a number line. So I have 2 number lines drawn up here, which is the way I like to think about the value of our price elasticity of demand. So let's start when we're looking at it without absolute values, so we know it's always going to be negative. That's this number line. It's always going to be negative from 0 to -infinity. Remember, if it's inelastic, we are going to see that number between 0 and -1. And so this area right here is going to be where we see things that are relatively inelastic. There's not a big change. Again, in this area, we know that the percentage change in quantity demanded is less than the percentage change in price. We're not seeing a big response. Anything from -1 all the way to -infinity, we're going to see this is relatively elastic. And relatively elastic happens when the percentage change in the quantity demanded is greater than the percentage change in price, meaning when prices change, we see a big reaction on the demand and the consumption side. And then, of course, we have right at this -1 is where we have that unit elastic value, meaning that we have the percentage change in quantity demanded equaling to the percentage change in price. Now, what if your textbook cares about the elasticity of demand but wants to just look at the absolute value, meaning they're talking about magnitude? Well, everything is just kind of flipped over to the positive end of this number line. So again, we'll look at the same exact thing. From that 0 to that 1, we have things that are relatively inelastic, right? Again, that means that the percentage change in the quantity demanded is less than the percentage change in price. Not a big response. Think of a rubber band. It's not pulling, it's not responding a lot. It's an inelastic rubber band. Flip side, from 1 to +infinity, this is where we'll see those relatively elastic products. Again, elastic, big response. So I know my percentage change in the quantity demanded is greater than my percentage change in price. Again, that's elastic because we see the numerator greater than the denominator, those numbers that are greater than 1. And last but certainly not least, when it is equal to 1, that is our unit elastic, and therefore the percentage change in the quantity demanded is equal to the percentage change in price. Unit elastic, if my price goes up by 5%, my quantity demanded is going down by 5%. If you have any additional questions, please throw them in the comments below or go to tierney.education.com and set up a time to meet with me. I would love to answer all of the questions that I can.